I'm Christy Schreiber, and we're here to discuss books that have changed the world and have changed us.
And I'm Gary Schreiber, and this is the How to Love Lit podcast. Today we're going to engage a poet from a part of the English-speaking world far away from both the American and the European continent. Katherine Mansfield, born Katherine Mansfield Beauchamp from Wellington, New Zealand. Mansfield is known for her short stories. She's been considered one of the finest stylists in what is really a long record of English prose, which is an impressive distinction, but more so when we understand that she wrote less than 80 of them during her abbreviated life.
Well, yeah. I mean, to stand out as a great English writer is notable, but especially for a short story writer. I mean, honestly, people don't normally respect short story writers. We think of the great writers as writing epic poems or novels or maybe plays. But Katherine wrote nothing long, and yet she stands out, and there's a couple of reasons for that. First, and perhaps more importantly, her writing is observant of human nature, and she's been called wise in the sense that she notices things about human behavior that most people don't see. And that's hard to do, and it's certainly hard to turn into a short story, but especially for somebody young, and she was young. But, wisdom doesn't necessarily correlate with age. I mean, we know that. And in her case, she learned a lot because she lived a hard life, and a lot of the hard parts of her life were her own doing, honestly, but not all of it. I mean, the time and place of her birth, her family's place in society, her temperament, all those things clashed. And that made her different from everyone she knew. I mean, she was different from her mother and different from her community. And that created a struggle within her family. It certainly created a struggle between her and her mother, but in society in general.
And, out of that came a lot of great art.
Well, it did.
She died in 1923 at the age of 34 from tuberculosis, and was really just at the very start of a career that was taking off.
Yes, and her early death, might have meant that she would be gone in anonymity, even if she was great at what she did. But if there were a couple things that worked in her favor.
So before we get into a little bit of her bio, let's start with those things that made her striking and interesting and what kept her legacy alive.
Yeah. Well, first of all, she was called, and she really is, original. And this was at a time in American literature, well, British literature, English literature, that we were looking for original. She was modern. And I don't mean in the sense that modern every year is something different from generation to generation. I mean modern in the sense of the modernist movement. She just very instinctively wanted to do something new. And the moment she lived in was this moment prime for newness. I mean, Ezra Pound would later make famous the phrase, make it new. And she naturally did that. Her voice resonated with people who were looking to literature to open up worlds of psychology and psychoanalysis. I mean, famous writers during her day, other names that you might have heard of, like Virginia Woolf, D.H. Lawrence, Bertrand Russell, they met her, they read her work, they admired her, they took her seriously. In fact, the famous writer Virginia Woolf said, quite famously, that Katherine Mansfield was the only writer she was ever jealous of. And that is high praise.
And, of course, that's what piqued my interest in Mansfield. But let's explain what we mean when we say she was writing about psychology. She was particularly interested in writing about the psychology of her characters. And the stories aren't really about action. They're about psychology. In fact, really not a lot happens in her stories.
Right. I mean, she uses vocalization and free indirect discourse to create this internal conversation that we all have inside our own heads. And what I mean by this, and we'll see it in the story that we're going to read today, is that the story is really restricted to the character's conscious, their emotions, their perceptions, and that's unusual. A lot of characters in her stories, feel like that they have two selves. In a lot of cases, we get the feeling that the main character feels that they're wasting their own potential, that they need an out. It's a hard emotion to try to communicate, and it's certainly something difficult to write an entire story about. But it's also a feeling that most of us can relate to at least some point in our lives.
So many of her stories are about what we call in literature, but also in life, epiphanies. But let's define that term. In psychology, we might call it an insight or an aha moment. And sometimes we go through life and we just figure something out. We may call it a schema revision or a conceptual change. It's really just the idea that our brain reorganizes some information. And so now we interpret a situation in a new way.
Right. And that is what Mansfield likes to write about. Virginia Woolf, she had her own way of saying it. She called it a moment of being. But sometimes there's just this moment that we have this realization about our world, about ourselves, and it changes how we understand not just ourselves, but how we understand other people. And of course, that's what an epiphany is. And sometimes it can be very good because we get a good insight and we realize things maybe are better, or they can also be bad. It depends on if what it shows you but makes it better or worse.
So if her work about epiphanies is what made her stand out, what made her famous, if not that?
Well, that's a good question. In fact, it's a great question. If you don't know what you're getting into in one of her stories, you may read it and you may think, why do people like this story? I mean, nothing happens. And if you said that about her stories, you would be absolutely right. Nothing does happen. And we're not used to that, especially in short stories. I mean, think about the ones we've highlighted on the podcast. I mean, you got Edgar Allan Poe and his grisly murders, and there's Washington Irving and Walter Scott, and the humorous things like Legend of Sleepy Hollow, Wandering Willie, O. Henry, and The Gift of the Magi, and the surprise endings. I mean, we expect stories to have plot twists, but her stories don't have that. In fact, they've been called plotless fiction.
Well, I'm going to be honest. Plotless fiction doesn't sound good.
No, on the surface, it kind of sounds awful. But while those other stories are focusing on things that are fantastical or out of the ordinary, she focused on things that were ordinary, things that would happen to any of us. It has been said that, and I'm going to make this quote, she had this quality of making marvelous things that are hidden within the mundane, if you want to make it sound good. And sometimes that's how life is. It's the things that happen to us in our regular life that change us way more than the bizarre or the unusual things that happen to us. So yeah, critically, plotless fiction about life's epiphanies is what makes her famous, and that's what's made her last over the years. But that doesn't answer a different question, which is the question I think you ask, which is, how did she get famous? I mean, because fame is tricky. You can be good at something and never be famous. I mean, how does a person get discovered? I mean, that's a completely different trick.
We're still waiting to find out.
I know. Many people are great at their skill, but they don't get discovered. Other people are discovered and they're terrible. I mean, it is a question.
I'm going to tell you, that's the question every Memphis or Nashville musician is working on right now.
I know. And the answer, of which I do not have, I think from what I can tell, a little luck has to be on your side. And that's kind of true for her as well. Although I guess in her case, she had some good luck and then some bad luck. But as I said before, she was up and coming, and she certainly had made her way, credit to her, to get in with all the right people, to get into the right literary circles. But then she got sick and she died at 34. And that's young. And it's quite possible that would have been enough to wipe her out and there would be no legacy of her at all. Ironically, had it not been for her husband. His name was John Middleton Murray, and they had met, 11 years before her death, and they'd been connected romantically that whole time, but they were only married for the last 5 years of her life. After her death, he edited and published her work. At first, he published stories, because she had been publishing, and she was up and coming, like I said, but he published stories that she hadn't published yet. But then, that went over well. He published her private journal. Then he published her letters. I mean, he would release new things of hers periodically for the next 30 years of his life. And over that,
every idea starts with a problem. Warby Parker's was simple. Glasses are too expensive. So they set out to change that. By designing glasses in-house and selling directly to customers, they're able to offer prescription eyewear that's expertly crafted and unexpectedly affordable. Warby Parker glasses are made from premium materials like impact-resistant polycarbonate and custom acetate. And they start at just $95, including prescription lenses. Get glasses made from the good stuff. Stop by a Warby Parker store near you.
Marketers, you know that feeling when your creative clicks? When that social post sends engagement through the roof? When your outside-of-the-box campaign hits ROI positive? When a personalized homepage turns prospects into customers? It's utter marketing bliss. Contentful helps you create tailored omni-channel experiences without working overtime. No stress, no limits, only possibilities. Get the feels at Contentful.com.
This message comes from Jackson. Taxes aren't something you can only think about once a year. With investments, planning for tax day is year-round. Fortunately, Jackson offers tax-efficient products. Visit Jackson.com for more information on how our products can make your tax bill a little bit less painful. Jackson is short for Jackson Financial Incorporated, Jackson National Life Insurance Company, Lansing, Michigan, and Jackson National Life Insurance Company of New York, Purchase, New York.
Time, he really crafted an image of her that he made. I mean, he monetized her work, he absolutely, there's no doubt, he established her reputation. Having said that, what he did with her has not been uncontroversial over the years. First of all, Murray, she's dead, so she doesn't have a say, published a lot of things that she would not have wanted other people to read. I mean, he published her private thoughts. But what's even more controversial than even that is he edited them. He crafted them for a particular image. He certainly edited anything negative about him out, but he only released things that made her into this person that he wished she had been. He recreated her, really. I turned her, what really history would tell you is a very complicated woman, into this, virtuous saint that she probably wouldn't even recognize.
Well, and the more we know about Mansfield and his relationship, the more cynical you get feeling about the way he made money off of her legacy. And their relationship was not healthy. It's even been described as psychologically codependent, even though I would never use a real psychological diagnosis retrospective on dead people.
No, of course not.
I guess I just did. But at the very least, we can call the relationship unstable, very emotionally intense, and definitely mutually dependent.
I would say stormy.
Stormy is a good word, and on one hand, they relied on each other. She needed his professional approval. He saw himself, even during her life, as the guardian of her genius, and they collaborated professionally. On the other hand, they both had affairs on each other, with or without the other's knowledge. They were jealous of each other and the cheating, and they fought, and they were on again and off again before they got married, and she had female lovers. They spent long periods of time separated from each other. I mean, it was messy, all of which he edited out of her journals. But regardless of all that turbulence, after her death, he promoted and monetized her memory to the controversial point that her life financed a very nice lifestyle for him, including his fourth wife's house, a point which has been made in the literature, and this has been the controversial part.
Well, understandably, and I have mixed feelings about it myself, but what we can say, to his credit, is that he created her legacy. Maybe it was out of love, maybe it was out of financial interest, but he was able to successfully make the argument to the world that Katherine was one of the greatest modernist writers of her generation, and the world has agreed with him. I mean, today, Mansfield is widely acknowledged. I mean, I've heard her called the key architect of the modernist epiphanic short story. I mean, she's in the company of James Joyce, Anton Chekhov, Sherwood Anderson. I mean, this is a very eclectic group.
Wow. Modernist epiphanic?
Correct.
Oh, okay. Make sure I got that idea down. And so we find ourselves today in this episode reading and discussing one of Katherine Mansfield's most anthologized stories, Miss Brill. It's short. You can read it in less than 10 minutes. It was published first in 1920 in the magazine The Athenaeum, but republished in 1922 in a book titled The Garden Party and Other Stories, just only about 8 months before her death. And this collection of her short stories is considered her best.
Right. And The Garden Party may be her most famous story. We'll look at it in the next episode. But Miss Brill is much shorter. It's much simpler. So this episode, we'll look at Miss Brill so we can kind of understand the way she's writing, what she's trying to do before we tackle kind of a little bit longer one. So like I said, because it's short, the story has to be compact. The year after she wrote it, she described her own writing process and why her stories were so short. She said this: "I chose not only the length of every sentence, but even the sound of every sentence. I chose the rise and fall of every paragraph to fit her." And of course, she's talking about Miss Brill. So as we read it, we do want to pay attention to every single word, maybe more than we might in a longer story, because everything is going to take us to meaning and where Mansfield is trying to lead us, remembering that the meaning of the story is not going to be in the plot. We're going to see somebody have an epiphany.
Okay. Although it was so brilliantly fine, the blue sky powdered with gold and great spots of light like white wine splashed over the jardins publiques, Miss Brill was glad that she had decided on her fur. The air was motionless, but when you opened your mouth, there was just a faint chill, like a chill from a glass of iced water before you sip, and now and again a leaf came drifting from nowhere from the sky. Miss Brill put up her hand and touched her fur. Dear little thing, it was nice to feel it again. She had taken it out of its box that afternoon, shaken out the moth powder, given it a good brush, and rubbed the life back into the dim little eyes. "What has been happening to me?" said the little sad eyes. Oh, how sweet it was to see them snap at her again from the red eider down. But the nose, which was of some black composition, wasn't at all firm. It must have had a knock somehow. Never mind, a little dab of black sealing wax when the time came, when it was absolutely necessary. Little rogue. Yes, she really felt like that about it. Little rogue biting its tail just by her left ear. She could have taken it off and laid it on her lap and stroked it.
So let's talk about all the things that we can see in this tiny little paragraph. First of all, let's look at the point of view. Who's talking in this story? Well, it has a narrator. The story is being narrated from a third-person perspective, sort of, because we don't see words like I or my or me. So obviously this isn't in the first person, but it's clear that this is definitely from the consciousness, from inside the perspective of Miss Brill. Now remember, Jane Austen has been widely credited for making this writing style popular. It's called free indirect discourse. That's a technical term, but it means the story is definitely written in the third person, but we're not seeing it from an outside distance. We're seeing it from inside the consciousness of the character. And in our case, we're seeing things from the consciousness of Miss Brill. We also can see our setting. We're somewhere French, right? Jardin public. Critics have said that they think it's likely in Bordeaux because the description matches the Jardin public in Bordeaux. There's a bandstand there, but I don't know that that's really specified nor really important. We know it's an urban park setting sometime in the late 19th, early 20th century. And lots of French cities have parks, and a lot of them had parks in that time period where people would gather on Sundays, which is what we're going to see in this story. We also see that it's getting cold. It's the fall. She says old and green spots of light, like white wine splashed over the Jardin publics. Well, it's not very fall. There's still some green, but enough that the leaves are beginning to turn. But white wine, that makes it sound nice and elegant. I mean, it's a nice tone. It's positive. It's certainly not old and dingy. Finally, I want to point out how much time is devoted to discussing the fur. Now, the story's short. The fur must be important. As I've already told you, things that are emphasized have to be important. So what's important about it? Well, maybe, just maybe, it's a symbol. I've read the whole story, so I'm going to be a little bit of a spoiler. It is. But think of it that way. We'll talk about what it might be a symbol for later on. But look at how she engages that fur. I mean, she talks to it, or really it talks to her. She personifies the fur. She gives it human characteristics. But at the very end, she goes even farther. She anthropomorphizes it. What does that mean? She kind of imagines that it's alive. She treats it like it's kind of a living pet.
You know, which really isn't that hard to imagine for this time period. If you've seen some of the ladies' furs during this era, that they actually still had the head and the tail on the fur, so it might have really looked like a pet draped around her neck.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of described like that. But what's also described is that of what it means to her. She rubs the life back into it. It needs new life. It's kind of battered, old. She uses the word a little sad, but okay. The tone is still excited. She's excited to take out her little fur, even if it is battered and old, and give it a little bit of life. With that in mind, let's keep reading the next part of the story.
She felt a tingling in her hands and arms, but that came from walking, she supposed. And when she breathed, something light and sad, no, not sad exactly, something gentle seemed to move in her bosom. There were a number of people out this afternoon, far more than last Sunday, and the band sounded louder and gayer. That was because the season had begun. For although the band played all year round on Sundays, out of season it was never the same. It was like someone playing with only the family to listen. It didn't care how it played, if there weren't any strangers present. Wasn't the conductor wearing a new coat, too? She was sure it was new. He scraped with his foot and flapped his arms like a rooster about to crow, and the bandsmen sitting in the green rotunda blew out their cheeks and glared at the music. Now there came a little fluty bit, very pretty, a little chain of bright drops. She was sure it would be repeated. It was. She lifted her head and smiled. Only two people shared her special seat. A fine old man in a velvet coat, his hands clasped over a huge carved walking stick, and a big old woman sitting upright with a roll of knitting on her embroidered apron. They did not speak. This was disappointing, for Miss Brill always looked forward to the conversation. She had become really quite expert, she thought, at listening as though she didn't listen, at sitting in other people's lives just for a minute while they talked around her. She glanced sideways at the odd couple. Perhaps they would go soon. Last Sunday, too, hadn't been as interesting as usual. An Englishman and his wife, he wearing a dreadful Panama hat and she button boots. And she'd gone on the whole time about how she ought to wear spectacles. She knew she needed them, but that it was no good getting any. They'd be sure to break and they'd never keep on. And he'd been so patient. He suggested everything. Gold rims, the kind that curved around your ears, little pads inside the bridge. No, nothing would please her. They'll always be sliding down my nose. Miss Brill had wanted to shake her. The old people sat on the bench, still as statues. Never mind that there was always the crowd to watch.
So, what do we see here? We have this woman, Miss Brill, and she goes to this park. It seems like every Sunday, and she people watches. I mean, she's excited because she calls it the season has begun. We can assume maybe it's the season for this band to be out. Certainly it's the social season. There are lots of people out. She pays special attention, notice, to what people wear. I mean, the conductor is wearing a new coat. There's a fine old man in a velvet coat, a big old woman knitting on her embroidered apron. I mean, you're going to see the guy in the Panama hat and the lady in the button boots. So clothing, let's point out.
Every idea starts with a problem. Warby Parker's was simple. Glasses are too expensive. So they set out to change that. By designing glasses in-house and selling directly to customers, they're able to offer prescription eyewear that's expertly crafted and unexpectedly affordable. Warby Parker glasses are made from premium materials like impact-resistant polycarbonate and custom acetate. And they start at just $95, including prescription lenses. Get glasses made from the good stuff. Stop by a Warby Parker store near you.
This is the Chase Sapphire Lounge in Boston Logan. You got clam chowder. In New York, Dirty Martini. Over 1,300 airport lounges and one card that gets you in. Chase Sapphire Reserve. Now even more rewarding.
Learn more at chase.com/Sapphire Reserve. Cards issued by JP Morgan Chase Bank and a member FDIC. Subject to credit approval.
Might also be a symbol.
Is that another foreshadowing?
Well, it's something.
Okay. Well, and of course in life it is too. We identify who we are by what we wear. It tells people our social status and sometimes our job, maybe our financial status and what we think about ourselves and what we value. I mean, clothing communicates a lot, and Miss Brill obviously is tuned into that.
Yes. We also see the phrase that she looks forward to the conversation. That, of course, makes us think, well, maybe she's a little odd. I mean, she's not really there meeting anyone herself. She's just eavesdropping on other people's lives. She's there alone. She's seeing all these other people, but she's not engaging them. She's not talking to them.
To and fro in front of the flower beds and the band rotunda, the couples and groups paraded, stopped to talk, to greet, to buy a handful of flowers from the old beggar who had his tray fixed to the railings. Little children ran among them, swooping and laughing. Little boys with big white silk bows under their chins. Little girls, little French dolls dressed up in velvet and lace. And sometimes a tiny staggerer came suddenly rocking in the open from under the trees, stopped, stared as suddenly, sat down, flop, until its small, high-stepping mother, like a young hen, rushed scolding to its rescue. Other people sat on the benches in green chairs, but they were nearly always the same. Sunday after Sunday, and Miss Brill had often noticed, there was something funny about nearly all of them. They were odd, silent, nearly all old, and from the way they started, they looked as though they'd just come from dark little rooms or even cupboards.
You know, this line stands out. It's strange. First of all, here she is judging everyone. She compares one mother to a hen. Little girls are like French dolls dressed up in velvet and lace. And some of her judgments aren't really nice. She says there was something odd about nearly all of them. They were old and looked like they had come from cupboards. I mean, what a comparison. People looking like they were decorations or objects or pulled out of cupboards.
Behind the rotunda, the slender trees with yellow leaves down drooping, and through them just a line of sea, and beyond the blue sky with gold-veined clouds. Tum-ta-tum, tiddle-tum, tiddle-tum, tum-tiddly, tum-tum, blew the band. 2 young girls in red came by, and 2 young soldiers in blue met them, and they laughed and paired and went off arm in arm. 2 peasant women with funny straw hats passed, gravely, leading beautiful smoke-colored donkeys. A cold, pale nun hurried by. A beautiful woman came along and dropped her bunch of violets, and a little boy ran after to hand them to her, and she took them and threw them away as if they'd been poisoned. Dear me, Miss Brill didn't know whether to admire that or not. And now an ermine toque and a gentleman in gray met just in front of her. He was tall, stiff, dignified, and she was wearing the ermine toque she'd bought when her hair was yellow. Now everything, her hair, her face, even her eyes, was the same color as the shabby ermine, and her hand in its clean glove, lifted to dab her lips, was a tiny yellowish paw. Oh, she was so pleased to see him, delighted. She rather thought they were going to meet that afternoon. She described where she'd been, everywhere, here, there, along by the sea. The day was so charming, and didn't he agree? And wouldn't he, perhaps? But he shook his head, lighted a cigarette, slowly breathed a great deep puff into her face, and even while she was still talking and laughing, flicked the match away and walked on. The ermine toque was alone. She smiled more brightly than ever, but even the band seemed to know what she was feeling and played more softly, played tenderly, and a drum beat. The brute, over and over. What would she do? What was going to happen now? But as Miss Brill wondered, the ermine toque turned, raised her hand as though she'd been someone else, much nicer, just over there, and she pattered away.
So we get to this girl in the ermine toque, and then actually the girl just becomes the ermine toque. And I have to admit, I had to Google what an ermine toque even was. I did not know what it was. Gary, did you know what that was?
Yes, I did. And I'm sure you've seen them. You just didn't know what they were called. They are a recognizable fashion accessory for the time period, which may explain why you don't have one.
Maybe I need one.
Yes. Well, an ermine is a white weasel. A toque is a small hat. So it's those little fur hats. The ermine ones were white. At the turn of the century, unlike today, furs were very fashionable and a fashion statement of luxury. And even women who were not wealthy would often own a small piece of fur, and fur made everything more elegant.
Well, so there we have it. I mean, we have this woman who is dressed nicely, elegantly, hopeful for social recognition. But sadly, what Miss Brill witnesses is she gets dumped. I mean, she experiences social rejection. The man flicks a match and walks off, leaving the ermine toque alone, yet smiling more brightly than ever is what it says.
And the band changed again and played more quickly, more gaily than ever, and the old couple on Miss Brill's seat got up and marched away, and such a funny old man with long whiskers hobbled along in time to the music and was nearly knocked over by 4 girls walking abreast. Oh, how fascinating it was, how she enjoyed it, how she loved sitting here watching it all. It was like a play. It was exactly like a play. Who could believe the sky at the back wasn't painted? But it wasn't till a little brown dog trotted on solemn and then slowly trotted off like a little theater dog, a little dog that had been drugged, that Miss Brill discovered what it was that made it so exciting. They were all on the stage. They weren't only the audience, not only looking on, they were acting. Even she had a part and came every Sunday. No doubt somebody would have noticed if she hadn't been there. She was part of the performance after all. How strange she'd never thought of it like that before, and yet it explained why she made such a point of starting from home at just the same time each week, so as not to be late for the performance. And it also explained why she had quite a queer, shy feeling at telling her English pupils how she spent her Sunday afternoons. No wonder. Miss Brill nearly laughed out loud. She was on the stage. She thought of the old invalid gentleman to whom she read a newspaper 4 afternoons a week while she slept in the garden. She had got quite used to the frail head on the cotton pillow, the hollowed eyes, the open mouth, the high-pinched nose. If he had been dead, she mightn't have noticed for weeks. She wouldn't have minded. But suddenly he knew he was having a paper read to him by an actress. An actress. The old head lifted. 2 points of light quivered in the old eyes. An actress, are ye? And Miss Brill smoothed the newspaper as though it were the manuscript of her part and said gently, Yes, I have been an actress for a long time. The band had been having a rest. Now they started again, and what they played was warm and sunny, yet there was just a faint chill, a something that was it. What was it? Not sadness. No, not sadness. A something that made you want to sing. The tune lifted, the light shone, and it seemed to Miss Brill that in another moment all of them, all the whole company would begin singing. The young ones, the laughing ones who were moving together, they would begin, and the men's voices, very resolute and brave, would join them. And then she too and the others on the benches, they would come in with a kind of accompaniment, something low that scarcely rose or fell, something so beautiful and moving, and Miss Brill's eyes filled with tears, and she looked smiling at all the other members of the company. Yes, we understand, she thought, though they understood, she didn't know.
And so we've seen here a shift in Miss Brill. For most of the story up to this part, the whole first part of the story, we see Miss Brill as an observer. I mean, she sits around watching all the different people, judging them mostly by what they're wearing, by what they're saying. She eavesdrops into their conversations. But now it's different. Miss Brill has decided she's not an observer, she's a participant. And she imagines that the band is playing for the performance, that the people sitting on these benches are actors. The couples are performers. And then it gets to herself. She herself is part of the play. She imagines herself to be an actress, a part of everything that happens. And this feels like kind of an emotional realization. The tone shifts to pride. Her eyes fill with tears. She looks smiling at the other people in the park. She calls them members of the company. I mean, she's part of something. She's part of a spectacle, a member of this cast. She says, we understand, she thought, though what they understood, she didn't know. But the feeling, it makes her feel significant. She belongs here. If she weren't here, they would notice that she weren't here. We also get this insight that her life, her regular life, she doesn't feel that way. I mean, she clearly works as a tutor. She references her pupils, and that word pupil historically is used for not like a teacher in a classroom, but a private lesson. She talks about the old man who basically sleeps all day and she reads to him. But if he knew that she were an actress, it would be different. I mean, she spends Sundays by herself, alone. This suggests that she has no family, no friends, at least nobody nearby.
Interesting. There's a psychological term for this called the imaginary audience. And it's a super common behavior amongst adolescents. And here she is experiencing this as a grown woman.
Well, I don't know. Maybe it's a function of just being alone.
Just at that moment, a boy and a girl came and sat down where the old couple had been. They were beautifully dressed. They were in love. The hero and heroine, of course, just arrived from his father's yacht. And still soundlessly singing, still with that trembling smile, Miss Brill prepared to listen.
And so we're introduced to these new characters, the hero and the heroine, and what makes them this. I mean, this couple isn't like the ones that she's been judging before, but mostly it's because they're beautifully dressed. And because of that, she imagines they're coming from a yacht. She calls them the hero and heroine, and she wants to eavesdrop on their conversation, and she does.
No, not now, said the girl. Not here, I can't. But why? Because of that stupid old thing at the end there, asked the boy. Why does she come here at all? Who wants her? Why doesn't she keep her silly old mug at home? It's her fur, which is so funny, giggled the girl. It's exactly like a fried whiting. I'll be off with you, said the boy in an angry whisper. Then, tell me, petite chérie. No, not here, said the girl. Not yet.
And so now we're going to see another and this final transition. If at first Miss Brill was observing and noticing other people, and then she turned into this participant of this imaginary thing that she believed herself to be a part of, now it's been reversed. She's the one being observed. And just as she passed judgment on other people, they're passing judgment on her, but it's out loud and it's cruel. The boy calls her a stupid old thing. They literally say, who wants her? The girl turns the attention to her fur, that fur that she was so proud of. She calls it funny. She compares it to fried whiting, which is a flaky piece of fried fish. It's mean, but it's also the climax of the story. And this is the moment that Miss Brill really has her epiphany. She can't ever go back from this moment. What do you think, Gary?
Oh, well, she's exposed. She can't hide from who she is. I mean, she's old and unwanted and not a part of society, and something that people not only don't care about, but literally wish that she didn't exist. That's kind of rough.
Well, it is rough, and it has an effect on her. And it has the same effect it would have on me. I mean, she's clearly going to be crushed.
On her way home, she usually bought a slice of honey cake at the baker's. It was her Sunday treat. Sometimes there was an almond in her slice, sometimes not. It made a great difference. If there was an almond, it was like carrying home a tiny present, a surprise, something that might very well not have been there. She hurried on the almond sundaes and struck the match for the kettle in quite a dashing way. But today, she passed the baker's by, climbed the stairs, went into the little dark room, her room like a cupboard, and sat down on a red eiderdown. She sat there for a long time. The box that the fur came out of was on the bed. She unclasped the necklet quickly without looking, laid it inside. But when she put the lid on, she thought she'd heard something crying. And
of course, we end back at the fur. And I think we can see now that maybe she's the fur and her room is like a cupboard. It's sad, and I'm left with the idea that society shouldn't be mean like this. I mean, the hero and the heroine, they sound very childish and immature to look at people and judge them by what they wear, discarding them if they're old or alone or funny looking. I mean, the story can be viewed as a criticism of modern society. We can be so closed off, so distant and judgy, especially in a city, where everyone's kind of anonymous.
Yes, but it's also a psychological expose at exactly how often we construct illusions to protect ourselves from painful realities. I mean, the story is entirely in Miss Brill's head, and she does a lot of imagining for long periods of time to avoid recognizing her own social isolation. And when the story ends, she puts away the fur and something she knew was getting older but thought was still valuable. She puts it away somewhat accepting for herself that it's worthless. And she heard something crying. And, of course, she's the one crying, but it's read as an observer from the outside. But when she put the lid on, she thought she heard something crying.
That last line, I don't know if you knew this, but it's one of the more famous lines in modernist fiction. I mean, it's very carefully crafted and it's symbolic. The emotion Miss Brill feels, it's transferred to that fur in the box, and we can understand how important the fur is in terms of what it symbolizes. And maybe I think it kind of symbolizes her. She's like the fur. I mean, she's old. She's like the fur in that she was once elegant, and the fur used to work, and she, like the fur, might have been somebody, but now nobody wants her and nobody sees any use for her. The crying is sorrow, and you feel it because Mansfield has taken us into Brill's consciousness, and we feel intimately connected, and we can understand her devastation, and we want to respect her dignity. I just kind of want to give her a hug and maybe go buy her one of those honey cakes and hope it has an almond in it.
Oh, my gosh. I would like to say there is so much Freudian projection going on in this whole thing. It's just solid. Well, I suspect if you knew all that was going on, you likely would. You'd probably buy her the whole cake.
I would have.
And I guess we all would. At least I hope we would. I mean, it is a sad story about isolation, but yet you're right. It's a story that we've witnessed many times ourselves as we have people watched in parks and at malls and in cities or wherever any groups of people are gathered. And it's not a moralizing story. She's not fussing at us. It's just a story about the way things are. And so there she is, the great New Zealander, Miss Katherine Mansfield. We'll read another one of her stories next week, and it's longer. But now we know about epiphanies and what we're looking for, and maybe it won't take as much explaining next time.
Well, maybe it won't, but I'm sure I'll find something to say. I always do.
Well, yes, and I suppose you do, but that's part of the fun. So thank you all for listening, and whether this is your first time to encounter Miss Mansfield or whether you're a longtime fan, we hope we gave you some food for thought. And as always, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend, a colleague, a fellow teacher, or student of literature. You can share it via WhatsApp or text or social media or YouTube. And remember, our website is howtolovelypodcast.com. And from there, you can find all of our 300 different episodes on literature. And again, thank you for supporting us as we help make the teaching and learning of English literature enjoyable and accessible for as many people as possible.
Peace out.
Marketers, you know that feeling when your creative clicks? When that social post sends engagement through the roof? When your outside of the box campaign hits ROI positive? When a personalized homepage turns prospects into customers? It's utter marketing bliss. Contentful helps you create tailored omni-channel experiences without working overtime. No stress, no limits, only possibilities. Get the feels at Contentful.com.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What if you laughed all through your commute? Or if you heard the funniest story while at the gym? Well, now you can. I'm Jamila Jamil, and guests on my new podcast, Wrong Turns, share their most mortifying and hilarious disaster stories. I'm talking people like Mae Martin, Bob the Drag Queen, Catherine Ryan, Jake Johnson, Margaret Cho, Simon Pegg, Penn Badgley, and so many more. So listen wherever you get your podcast, Wrong Turns, where dignity goes to die.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
This is a vacation with Chase Sapphire Reserve. The butler, the spa. This is The Edit, a collection of hand-picked luxury hotels and a $500 edit credit. Chase Sapphire Reserve, now even more rewarding.
Learn more at chase.com/Sapphire Reserve. Cards issued by JP Morgan Chase Bank and a member FDIC, subject to credit approval.